Well, hello there, and welcome back to my kitchen table, a place in most homes where we can sit with family and friends and just talk for hours. Oh yeah, and with dogs snoring under the table, and I've recently acquired two baby cockatiels who haven't quite settled down yet, so you might hear them squawking in the background. They just like to join in, what can I say? Let's see where we're off to today. Colorado, a western US state which has a diverse landscape of arid desert, river canyons, and beautiful snow-covered Rocky Mountains, which are partly protected by the Rocky Mountain National Park. I wonder how long it took them to come up with that name. Sorry. I started off this video with a story, well, the script for the video, with a story from the UK, and then I thought, I shall make a comparison. A UK, USA comparison. Which is not easy, because for starters I had to find a state the same size as the UK, which I did. Would you believe Oregon has exactly the same square mileage as the UK, according to Google? But the population difference is just way too great. We've got over 65 million residents. They've got 4 million residents. So hey. So I thought, where have I been? So I opted for Colorado. And basically just went for it. It's 10% bigger, and it's got about 60 million fewer people living there, but what the heck? Once I started doing my research, I just couldn't stop. Because there are crimes like, I'm going to say murder once, okay? After that, it's red rum. Thank you, Stephen King. Kidnapping, theft, burglary, all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean. And then there's the ones that are none of the above, some of which the law actually has no name for. So, if you're ready, take a seat and I'll tell you a story. Actually, I'm going to tell you more than one story, so hold on tight. Colorado authorities issued an arrest warrant for a former funeral home owner. They said it kept a deceased woman's body in a hearse for 2 years outside his house. The police also found the cremated remains, or cremains, of at least 30 people. It's just the absolutely disgusting discovery occurred on the 6th of February 2024 during a court-ordered eviction of a house rented by Miles Harford, the 33-year-old owner of Apollo Funeral and Cremation Services in the suburb of Denver, in a little place called Littleton in Colorado. The funeral home had actually been closed since September 2022. It seems Mr. Harford appears to have experienced financial trouble in his business. At times, he wasn't able to complete cremations to provide remains to families for services. That's what Matt Clark, the Denver police commander, said. On occasion, he said, Harford might have provided family members with another person's ashes instead of the ashes of their loved ones. Temporary urns, plastic boxes the size of a shoebox, were found in a crawl space of the house while a Denver sheriff's deputy oversaw the removal of Harford's belongings. Some of the boxes were empty. Other urns were found in a moving truck, parked outside. Still others were in a hearse, where investigators found a woman's body covered with blankets. Clark said Harford, who's not on the run, he's not hiding or anything like that, he's fully cooperating with investigators. He'd said that she died in August 2022. The recovered cremations appear to be associated with individuals who passed away between 2012 and 2021. Harford is expected to be charged with abuse of a corpse, forgery of a death certificate, and theft of money paid for a cremation. Other charges are possible as the investigation continues, because it was quite recent. Said Beth McCann of the Denver District Attorney's Office. Clark said Harford acknowledged to police that he owed money to several. Now, we call them crematoriums. In the research that I found, they're called crematories. I'm going to call them crematoriums because that's what I'm used to. So he owes money to several crematoriums in the area. So none would cremate the 63-year-old woman's body because he owed them money. So he decided to store the body in the hearse outside his house for 2 years. A family told investigators that they were given what they believed were the woman's ashes, which had been turned over to the Office of the Medical Examiner. I wonder if they can get DNA from ashes. That's something I didn't find out. Mr. Clark said the family is devastated. They are shocked. And they were hurt by this. Who wouldn't be? He said they believed they were processing their grief with the remains they had and had services with that. And then they come to find out that was not the person that was, shall we say, processed. And in fact, she was being held in the hearse outside the guy's house for 2 years. Sorry, I've got to keep saying it because it's not sinking in at all. When George Rosales learned his late wife's body had been left on the gurney of a hearse and that he'd been given someone else's ashes, he tried to stay strong for their 2 young adult children, as any parent would. But he said in private, I've cried many times for her. He said, I thought I was done with this, but it started all over again. I probably wouldn't have found out about my wife's body if he wasn't getting evicted. I wonder how long she would have laid there if he'd have kept up to date with his rent. Unimaginable. The other cremains found on the property appear to have been professionally cremated. Thank goodness he didn't just burn them in the backyard. Investigators are checking labels on the cremains, and they're checking them against state databases, and they're meeting with families. Now, as you can imagine, these conversations are extremely difficult. Because the information just comes as a shock to the families, well, to many of them, several of whom believed that they had the entire remains of their loved ones. State licensing records showed that no discipline or board actions for Apollo funeral and cremation services were on record. And it had been licensed from March 2012 right through to May 2022. In 2018, Harford and his company were sued by another funeral home and ordered to pay around $27,000 for services the other home had provided, according to court records. The same company, Kansas-based Wilbert Funeral Services, sued Harford and his company again in 2021, saying Harford owed another nearly $9,000. That case is still pending. Last year, a woman who said she was Harford's former employer sought a court order to keep him away from her. This was over alleged harassment. Although, in her application, she said that she'd paid Harford to cremate 2 of her pets, but he didn't return them to her. When you think of this logically, awful thoughts just go through your mind. Did he just throw all the ashes into a big pot and do a scoop for you, a scoop for you, a scoop for you? Because if he did, some of those people have also got the remains of her pets in their ashes, sitting on their fireplace. Beggars belief. That's the end of story number 1. And believe me, they get worse. Used protective clothing littered the doorway of a closed funeral home on the 6th of October 2023 in Penrose, Colorado. This was after 189 bodies were found and removed by officials. John and Carrie Halford own the Return to Nature funeral home in Penrose, which is a small town about 100 miles or 160 kilometres south of Denver. The remains were found on the 4th of October 2023 by authorities responding to a report of an abhorrent smell coming from the company's decrepit building. Officials initially estimated there'd be around 115 bodies inside, but the numbers just kept getting bigger, until finally, when they'd finished removing all of the remains, by mid-October, there was 189. A day after the odour was reported, the director of the State Office of Funeral Home and Crematory Registration spoke on the phone with John Halford, the owner. He tried to conceal the improper storage of corpses. Obviously, he would, wouldn't he? He acknowledged having a problem on the site and claimed he practiced taxidermy there. A hearse and debris could be seen at the rear of the Return to Nature funeral home. A family had actually filed a lawsuit on the 30th of October 2023 against the Colorado funeral home, where 189 decaying bodies were found, alleging that the owners allowed the remains of their loved ones to just rot away while they sent families fake ashes. The funeral home also had a location in Colorado Springs, but there's absolutely nothing to say whether any charges pertained to the handling of bodies at that location. The couple's arrest involved funeral home operations over a 4-year period. The families were told the pair stand accused of abusing corpses, stealing, laundering money and forging documents. Relatives of people whose remains were handled by the funeral home have feared that their loved ones were not cremated and were instead among the remains that authorities found. They said death certificates indicated the remains were cremated at one of 2 crematoriums, but both crematoriums told officials that they were not performing cremations at that time for return to nature due to unpaid bills. After the bodies were removed from the facility in Penrose, authorities actually began working to identify the remains using fingerprints, dental records, medical hardware and DNA. Now, medical records, fingerprints and DNA, quite straightforward. You'd think you understand what they are. Medical hardware, I'll just explain. Like, if your grandfather had a pacemaker fitted, and they were doing an autopsy on that body and they found the pacemaker actually has an identification number on it, a registration number. So they'll be able to trace that registration number on the database, well, that particular database, and find out whose body it is. Then they'd confirm it with DNA. Court records say that John Halford is being represented by the Public Defender's Office, and they don't comment on cases to the media. Carrie Halford is being represented by attorney Michael Stasinski, and he declined to make any comment on the case as well. In court for a scheduled hearing, Heather DeWolf held up a photo of her late son, Zach, who died in 2020 at the age of 33. Returned to nature handled his remains. She said, "I don't view them honestly as humans at this point. I don't believe a human could do this." DeWolf told a reporter, though her son's remains had yet to be identified among many discovered at the facility, she feared the worst. The container she had rocked like a baby, thinking it was her son's ashes, had some other material inside. She said, "I had not rocked him since he was a child, and I could put my arms around him now and just hold him." Her eyes were watering as she said, looking back, "I don't know if I was rocking my son or rocking concrete." One of the aggrieved family members, Tanya Wilson, said her mother's body was among the neglected remains found in October 2023, and that ashes that returned to nature told her family where her mother's were not. After law enforcement officials identified the body of her mother, who Wilson remembered with such sweet memories, she said she was a hard-working woman, often working 3 jobs just to keep the family afloat. But she cooked the most unbeatable and unbelievable Korean dishes. The authorities gave Wilson the jewellery left on the body. Some substance was left on the bracelet, she said. She also said, "I don't think any amount of jail or prison time will justify my brother having to clean my mother's rotting flesh off her bracelet that they gave back to us. Nothing." She was asked about the arrests, and she said, "It's just one step in a long process. I don't feel any satisfaction from this right now." The Halfords were actually arrested in Oklahoma in October 2023 after allegedly fleeing Colorado to avoid prosecution. They went to one of their parents' homes. Like, they're not going to look there for us, let's go there. I don't think they were actually on the run. I think they were just saying their goodbyes because they knew what was coming. They've been jailed on a $2 million bond and both have been charged with 189 counts of abuse of a corpse, 5 counts of theft, 4 counts of money laundering, and more than 50 counts of forgery. So, this is one of the things I don't understand personally, is this forgery charge. The forgery charge is with regards to, in this case, is with regards to death certificates. In this country, death certificate has to be signed by a doctor, not a funeral director. We have a system where if someone dies at home and they're under the treatment of their own GP, general practitioner, then the general practitioner will sign. If they're under hospital treatment, it'll be a hospital doctor that will sign the death certificates after examination. If an autopsy is required, it's the coroner, etc., etc. So you get the idea there. If they die in hospital, they have to have what should we say? A copy of the death certificate in order to claim the body, for the funeral director to claim the body. And they come in like different colours, so there's like a pink slip and a green slip and a yellow slip and whatever. And you have to give, like, I think it's the green slip to the funeral director for them to claim the body. You take the other part of it, which is the statement of death from the doctor, to the registrar's office. That's a qualified registrar of births and deaths and marriages. So you have to go to your local registry office, and then you get the actual certificate of death. The company, which was founded in 2017 and offered cremations and what they called green burials. They were called green burials because there was no embalming fluid used. They kept doing business even as its financial and legal problems mounted big. The owners had missed tax payments in recent months. They were evicted from one of their properties and were sued for unpaid bills by other crematoriums. I've got to stick with crematoriums, sorry. That quit doing business with them long ago, according to public records and interviews with people that worked with them. Colorado had some of the weakest oversight of funeral homes in the nation. In America. It's not just America, believe me. With no routine inspections or qualifications required for funeral home operators. There's no indication the state regulators visited the site or contacted Halford until more than 10 months after the Penrose Funeral Home's registration expired in November 2022. State lawmakers gave regulators the authority to inspect funeral homes without the owner's consent. But there was no additional funding or money for the increased duties of the inspector, i.e. additional inspections. John Halford had been worried as far back as 2020 about getting caught, according to the prosecutors. He said, "My one and only focus is keeping us out of jail." That's in a text that he allegedly wrote. You see, this is where this allegedly came in. It was on his phone, about their business, about the family, basically him and his wife. To his wife, but it's still allegedly, because someone else could have written it. Other texts included messages between the Halfords about selling off assets to cover their expenses and worrying about losing everything if they were exposed. In a 2020 exchange, John Halford messaged his wife that they needed to begin restoring the building in Penrose and appeared to suggest various ways to get rid of the bodies, according to Kevin Clark, who was an investigator with the District Attorney's Office. Now bear in mind those last three paragraphs that I've just said, that they're in debt, they've got to sort the building out, they're going to get caught, they've got to get rid of the bodies, etc., etc., etc. The indictment alleges that the couple used $882,300 in pandemic relief funds. Bear in mind, those relief funds came from taxpayers. And they used those funds to buy things for themselves, including cars, vacations, dinners out, tuition for their child, cryptocurrency, cosmetic surgery, and jewellery. They carried out the fraud and obtained 3 loans between March 2020 and October 21. Now, additionally, during that time, the couple took in another $130,000 from families paying for cremations and burial services that they never provided. So that's $1,012,300. That's not including the 3 loans that they took out because they don't know how much they were for. In just over 18 months. They spent the lot. But they're in debt up to their eyeballs. They've got 189 bodies hanging around the premises, rotting. Isn't human nature strange? Previously released court documents actually reveal more details about how they spent the money. This is going to scare you, shock you. They bought a GMC Yukon and an Infinity that together cost $120,000. This is the bit I was on about. The cost of those 2 cars together would have covered the cost of the cremations of the 189 bodies left rotting on their premises twice. But they bought 2 cars instead and then continued to worry about the aftermath. They also paid for trips to California, Florida and Las Vegas, as well as $31,000 in cryptocurrency, laser body sculpting, and shopping at luxury retailers such as Gucci and Tiffany & Co. Now we know where the jewellery came from. And that's according to court documents. But they left in their wake a trail of unpaid bills, disgruntled landlords, and unsettled business disputes. Oh yeah, and 189 bodies left rotting around their premises. Once, the couple claimed to a former landlord that they would settle their rent when they were paid for work that they had done for the Federal Emergency Management Agency during the coronavirus pandemic. That's FEMA. The business's website actually features logos for FEMA and the Department of Defence. But during investigations, FEMA said that they didn't have any contracts with that funeral home. A Defence Department database search also showed they didn't have any contracts with the funeral home either. In 2022, the company failed to pay more than $5,000 in property tax at one of their locations. Then, the business was slapped with a $21,000 judgment for not paying for a couple of hundred cremations, according to public records and Lisa Epps, attorney for the crematory Wilbert Funeral Services. Wilbert Funeral Services, I do apologise. So there's $26,000 that they could have paid, with the over $1 million that they had, plus the loans that they spent on themselves. You see, there's a knock-on effect. When one business doesn't pay another business for services rendered, they can't pay their staff, so there's redundancies and layoffs. Shorter working weeks are introduced because they can't afford to pay their staff. Then they can't afford to pay their bills. Then they file bankruptcy. But the ones who owe them the money, they just owe them the money because they don't give a shit. They don't think of that knock-on effect. And these two definitely didn't. Selfish. Just doesn't cover it. As of earlier this month, July 2024, John and Carrie Halford, the owners of the Return to Nature funeral home in Penrose, Colorado, were still in jail on a $2 million bond. The FBI says the bodies, which included fetuses, infants, children and adults, both male and female, were stored in various ways, including body bags, cardboard boxes, plastic totes, and wrapped in plastic. Some bodies may have been there as far back as 4 years, because some actually had the death dates on them for 2019. I hope them two rot in jail. Truly do. And there we come to the end. Story number 2. Hello. I've just taken a break. Had a coffee. Cleaned the bird cage out. Fed the birds. Fed the fish. And now I thought I'd best get this video finished before I go and give my dog a haircut. What a busy person I am. I've been laid up for a few days with a bad back, so I haven't been able to do anything. Right, and off we go with story number 3 from Colorado. A former Colorado funeral home owner was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison on Tuesday, January the 3rd, 2023, for defrauding relatives of the dead by dissecting 560 corpses and selling their body parts without permission. Megan Hess, who was 46, pleaded guilty to fraud. She operated a funeral home that was called Sunset Mesa, and in the same building she ran a body parts entity called Donor Services. This was in Montrose in Colorado. The 20-year term was the maximum allowed under law. Don't forget, she's only been charged with fraud. Her 69-year-old mother, Shirley Koch, also pleaded guilty to fraud, and she was sentenced to 15 years. Koch's central role in this operation was chopping up the bodies. Hess and Koch used their funeral home, at times, to essentially steal bodies and body parts, using fraudulent and forged donor forms, which I suppose must have been neatly filed away. They must have kept really good records, because that's how they know that there was 560. That's not body parts, that's bodies. Hess and Koch's conduct caused immense emotional pain for the families and next of kin. I can only imagine. Oh my word. The federal case was actually triggered by a 2016 to 2018 Reuters investigative series about the sale of body parts in the United States, which is a virtually unregulated industry. Former workers told Reuters that Hess and Koch conducted unauthorised dismemberments of bodies, and a few weeks after the 2018 story was published, the FBI raided the premises. In their filings, prosecutors stressed the macabre nature of Hess's scheme and described it as one of the most significant body parts cases in recent US history. This is the most emotionally draining case I have ever experienced on the bench. That was US District Judge Christine M. Arguello. And she said that during the sentencing hearing in Grand Junction in Colorado. She said it's concerning to the court that defendant Hess refuses to assume any responsibility for her conduct. The judge ordered that Hess and Koch be sent to prison immediately. Hess's lawyer said that she'd been unfairly vilified as a witch, a monster, and a ghoul. No, I think that's fair. But he said she was actually a broken human being whose conduct can be attributed to a traumatic brain injury at the age of 18. Hess declined to speak to the judge. Koch told the judge that she was sorry and she took full responsibility for her actions. 26 victims described their horror at discovering what had happened to their loved ones. Our sweet mother, they dismembered her, Erin Smith said, selling her shoulders, knees and feet for profit. They don't even have a name for a crime this heinous. Tina Shannon, whose mother was dismembered against her will, told the court, "I've worn many masks. I've worn many masks to cover the pain. I'll never be okay." You see, in the United States, it's illegal to sell organs, such as hearts, kidneys, livers, even tendons, for transplant. They must be donated. By law, they must be donated free of charge. But selling body parts such as heads, arms, legs, even spines, which is what Hess did, for the use in research or education, is not regulated by federal law, in which case it's not actually illegal. I mean, she's supposed to get permission first, but it's not illegal. Hence the fraud. Hess committed crimes, prosecutors said, when she defrauded relatives of the deceased by lying about cremations and by dissecting bodies and selling them without permission. The surgical training companies and other firms which bought the parts, i.e. arms, legs, heads, torsos, etc., from Hess, did not know at all that they had been fraudulently obtained. At her funeral home, Hess charged families up to $1,000 for cremations that never occurred. They didn't happen. Prosecutors said she offered others free cremations in exchange for a body donation. Can you imagine if somebody's desperate? they may think, oh, he's dead anyway, so he's not going to know, and we've got no money to pay for it, and, oh, okay then. Getting people when they are at their lowest. That is the lowest of the low. She is a monster. It's just sick. Prosecutors said that she lied to more than 200 families who received cremated ashes from bins mixed with the remains of different cadavers. By the way, while I was on my little coffee break, I did look up to see if you could find DNA in cremated ashes, and apparently no. Well, maybe. Basically, that's the answer. No, you can't. But there is a very, 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 very slim chance that you might. But you can't. This is what I'm getting on the internet. Ridiculous. These two women were an absolute disgrace to the human race. Is there a solution? At nearly 200 bodies were found stacked and rotting, 189 actually, were stacked and rotting in a Colorado funeral home. Lawmakers have proposed bills to overhaul the state's threadbare funeral home regulations, which failed to prevent a string of gruesome cases. From sold body parts to fake ashes. And don't forget dead bodies being stored in a hearse outside a guy's house for nearly 2 years. Yeah, I can't get over that one. They're all bad, but that, I don't know, it's hanging on me, The cases have shattered hundreds of families. Many learned that their loved ones' remains were not in the ashes that they ceremonially spread or held tight for years, but were instead decaying in a building or in the back of a hearse outside a guy's house. Their devastation pushed state lawmakers to unveil a bipartisan bill that would implement Colorado's first licensing requirements to become a funeral home director, bringing licensing rules in line with all other states, and in some cases even surpassing them. The bill also sets requirements for other industry jobs, including embalmers and cremationists. Too many Colorado families have had to face the gruesome and unacceptable reality that their loved ones' remains had been mishandled, lost, improperly cared for, sold, and completely disrespected. That was from the Democratic State Senator Dylan Roberts, one of the bill's sponsors, at a press conference. He said things have reached a breaking point. Kinda has really, hasn't it? It's a dramatic update in a state where funeral home directors are not required to have even graduated high school. If the bill passes, a license would require a background check, a degree in mortuary science, passage of a national examination, and or an apprenticeship. A second Colorado bill to be introduced will require routine inspections by regulators, including after a funeral home's registration lapses, which occurred with the funeral home that Judge Rosales had hired. The poor man whose wife was stored in a hearse outside the guy's home. Colorado is currently far behind the rest of the states, many of which have routine inspections annually or just every few years. Unexpected inspections are the best ones. The Republican state representative, Matt Soper, one of the bill's sponsors, said, "We currently license hairdressers. We currently inspect restaurants. We need to be doing something similar, or certainly more, for the funeral homes." When the FBI told Sheila Canfield Jones that her daughter's remains had been found among the 189 bodies in one Colorado facility, she sat with officials, clutching the urn in disbelief. The mother refused to part with what she thought were her daughter's ashes. Canfield Jones recalled an official finally taking the ashes out of the urn and repeating, "It's not your daughter," continually. "He had to keep telling us over and over again," she said in an interview. God love her. She said it was horrific. Canfield Jones has been left with nightmares of her daughter's decomposing body. Joe Walsh, president of the Colorado Funeral Directors Association, said the group is in favour of the legislation, although he cautioned against believing these rules could prevent all future mishaps. He called them mishaps. 189 bodies rotting. A woman being kept in a car for nearly 2 years. In a hearse outside the guy's house. Someone cutting bodies up, 560 bodies, to sell the parts. And he calls them mishaps. Disgrace of a man. Yeah, we got the license, but that doesn't mean it's going to equate to perfection, unfortunately, Mr. Walsh said. Still, it's an important step in showing Colorado residents that they can trust the industry and prevent as many bad actors as possible. Wonder if he included himself in that. The best way to do this is to improve and show that we are adapting and adjusting and overcoming, he said. Hasn't he got a wonderful way with words? This guy doesn't give a shit, you can tell, can't you? It's just going to make his job harder. Oh dear. I agree that, that is the way forward, and it is adapting, adjusting and overcoming. But change cannot happen overnight, unfortunately. Okay, that's Colorado, over and done with, I promise. Now to the UK. Suspected human ashes were discovered at Legacy Funeral Directors in Hull, that's in the northeast of England, where 35 bodies were also found and removed in a police raid in March 2024. In an update from Deputy Chief Constable Dave Marshall and Assistant Chief Constable Tom McLaughlin from Humberside Police, they said they were pursuing extensive lines of inquiry in a lengthy investigation. They said they'd received over 1,000 calls of concern regarding this case. Poor relatives, my heart goes out to them, it really does. 2 people, a man aged 46 and a woman aged 23, had been arrested on suspicion of prevention of a lawful and decent burial, fraud by false representation, and fraud by abuse of position. They've since been released on bail with conditions while the investigation continues. Now, bail with conditions is not like regular bail in the UK. Bail in the UK is totally different. I'll explain. It differs greatly from the bail bond system applied in the United States. Like, they don't have to put the great Aunt Nellie's California mansion up as collateral or anything like that, or get a bail bondsman. Bail in England can be granted by the courts, the police, and certain other criminal justice authorities, including the Serious Fraud Office and the Financial Conduct Authority. When bail is granted, the suspect is sent home. That's it. You're waiting for something else, aren't you? I know you are. When they get bail, with no conditions, they're just sent home. With conditions, they get given regulations that they must follow. They could be told to report to the police station. Now, this could be every day. It could be once a month. They have to hand in their passports if they have one. And it's no good saying that they haven't got one, because all the police have got to do is make a phone call and find out that one was issued or not. The passport office is informed that their passports have been rescinded, and they can't just go in and get a new one. They could wear an ankle monitor and be given a strict curfew. Things like the usual one, I believe, is they can't go out until after 7 a.m. and they must be home by 7 p.m. So it's like 12 in, 12 out. Or if it's just regular bail, they literally get sent home with a smile and a wave. See you in court. It's ridiculous. Like Lucy Leppy, she was on bail for, 2 years and 4 months or something like that. Sitting at home, on full pay, by the way. Twiddling her thumbs. For over 2 years, she was suspected of murdering babies. And they just sent her home on bail. Ugh. The 35 bodies were recovered over one weekend and have been respectfully transported from one of Legacy's independent funeral directors' 3 branches to a mortuary in Hull for formal identification procedures. Recovery of the suspected human ashes is ongoing, along with searches of various business premises that are linked to the suspects. Not to the business, the suspects. Humberside Police said that they have 120 police staff working on the case. Assistant Chief Constable Mr McLaughlin added that the investigation was at a critical point. He said, "I recognise that this is a distressing time for all of those affected, and I have no doubt it will have a significant impact all across our communities and beyond." He said his heart goes out to all those affected by the truly terrible set of circumstances, adding, "I can only imagine how distressing this is and how upsetting it will be for you and your families. I know that you'll want and need much more information than I can give. But as we progress with the investigation, I want to assure you that we will provide you with updates as soon as we can. And I also want to give you a personal commitment that I will do everything possible to give you the answers that you so rightly deserve." He also asked the public to refrain from speculations on the investigation. Rumour mills, you know what it's like. A large number of police have been seen at the funeral parlour, including forensics officers, dressed in their white protective suits. Police had actually raided all 3 branches of the company, 2 in Hull and 1 in Beverley, after concerns were raised about storage and management processes relating to care of the deceased. Police urged anyone concerned with the service they received from the funeral parlour to use a dedicated telephone line. Legacy Independent Funeral Directors is a family-run business established in 2010, according to its website. it has yet to comment publicly. It has since come to light that this company owes over £55,000 to a local council for cremations and burials. Now that's something else that's different in the UK as it is to over in the States. In the UK, 99.9% of crematoriums are owned by the local council. Graveyards are owned and managed by the local council. There are the odd one that have been, shall we say, on religious grounds. People have bought land and it's been allowed to be used as a burial site, in which case then it's private land. But the other ones, everybody just has to pay the local council. That's it. Authorities are investigating businesses in London, Oxfordshire, Newcastle, Hampshire, East Yorkshire and Scotland. Literally one end of the country to the other. These investigations are things like missing ashes, bodies left to rot. You know the kind of thing. Most of these funeral homes are believed to be struggling financially, with unpaid court debts and unpaid rent and unpaid debts to the council. The sector operates largely without regulations and no statutory inspection regime. Surprise, surprise. Like I said, it's not just Colorado. Although businesses in the UK can choose whether to join a trade body, and they will actually carry out inspections and checks and basically keep them in line, give them advice. They pay for a service from that organisation. So they give them advice. They find if something's wrong, they will show them how to fix it. Emma Hardy, the MP for Kingston upon Hull West and Hessel, what a title, whose work to get justice for those involved in the legacy scandal, said there is an urgent need for the funeral sector to be regulated. There are still rogue funeral directors operating in this industry, leaving grieving families traumatised by their experiences. So not only do they lose a loved one, they then have the trauma of dealing with a rogue funeral director. The government was told 4 years ago by the Competition and Markets Authority that regulation was needed and that they needed to act urgently. 4 years ago. Police Scotland have launched an investigation into A. Milne funeral directors after several families reported allegations of ashes going missing and financial misconduct. One victim, Emma Weir from Glasgow, claimed undertakers at A. Milne did not embalm or ID tag her late father's body, and said her family were left in limbo when they asked for their deposit to be refunded. Miss Weir claimed A. Milne staff had to get two friends of the Weir family to help them when they took Mr. Weir's body from their home to a black company car. Imagine that. Oh, hey mate, can you give us a hand with this? No. The mother of three said the company also asked them for the deposit immediately, without even so much as speaking about coffins or any funeral plans whatsoever. In 2022, the Met Police also arrested Victor Perry, 52, after 4 bodies were discovered in a self-storage unit in northwest London. We had a mini heat wave Can you imagine the smell? We don't get summers in the UK, we get mini heat waves. Now, we've just had 3 days. Now, we've got a thunderstorm. These deaths of the people in the storage unit are not being treated as suspicious, and it's alleged that the bodies were actually being stored on pallets, but Mr. Perry denies this. Oh, I put them in storage unit, but I've done it right. Eh? 2 bodies were removed during raids in Didcot and Wantage in Oxfordshire, while in 2022, 2 decomposing bodies were found in Elkin and Bells funeral home in Gosport in Hampshire, after bailiffs arrived to collect the rent the undertakers had failed to pay for more than a year. In Newcastle, police officers raided the In Loving Memory funeral parlour in August 2022. A Northumbrian police spokesman said Jordan Lilly, a man in his 20s, was arrested on suspicion of preventing a lawful and decent burial. Mr. Lilly denied any wrongdoing. And in Northumberland, 3 former undertakers are facing a trial next year for funeral plan fraud. I think you have them over in the States. I think they have them in most parts of the world. Basically, it's a case of somebody choosing what kind of funeral they want, finding out how much it's going to be, and paying for it. Or they have things like cremation only plans. So, like, when you die, they take your body, they cremate you, they bring the ashes back for the family to do with what they will. So there's no like big service or anything like that with the body. It's just the ashes. So you put basically you pay for it up front. But what was happening was people were passing away. The families had the documentation from companies for the funeral plan. But the companies didn't exist. Detectives believe that they have identified all of the 35 bodies recovered at the funeral directors in Hull. That's an update, which is at the centre of a police investigation still. Humberside Police said it has had over 1,500 calls from people concerned about their loved ones' remains. Few details about the actual investigation have been revealed, but police said that they had concern for the care of the deceased. More than 30 people, there's about 100 people attended a vigil held outside the Hessel Road premises, the funeral home where 35 bodies were found, and unidentified ashes that may not be human ashes, but on the other hand they might be. During this vigil, they laid floral tributes and they laid little candles out to mark number 3 and number 5 as a mark of remembrance for the 35 bodies that were found there. Organiser Karen Dry, who used the company for the cremation of her parents in 2016 and 2018, said, "My family were cremated and their ashes were spread together. Some made into jewellery, some scattered in the rose garden at the cemetery, and some were put into a little urn which is kept at home." She went on to say, "I do want people to know that if those ashes belong to someone else's family and not mine, that they have been loved and respected as if they were my own." God love her. Assistant Chief Constable Tom McLaughlin said the families were understandably distraught. I think that's a bit of an understatement. While a specialist team worked to identify if the recovered ashes were human. I don't know how they're going to do it, because, like I said earlier, you can't get DNA from cremated ashes. So how are they going to know that it's human? In a statement, the Assistant Chief Constable said, "Working in partnership with His Majesty's Coroner, I can confirm that whilst formal identification procedures are ongoing, we do believe that we have contacted all families of the 35 deceased. My specially trained officers continue to support the families involved in this extremely difficult time, whilst lengthy inquiries are ongoing. My heart goes out, seriously, to all the families involved in these horrific, absolutely horrific stories that I've just read. My heart breaks for them. It truly does. And thanks very much for allowing me to tell you this story, and thank you so much for listening if you've got this far through it. Please remember to hit the like button and subscribe. You know the deal. But remember, you can't lose a smile. It's right there under your nose. I've been Sue, TCFN.